Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2023 March Madness preview, sponsored by the Sports Lock podcast. I am your host, Ben Mostaller, and tonight we are breaking down all things March Madness to prepare you guys for Thursday and Friday. Now, the time this video is coming out, some of the first four games have not been completed, but I want to make sure to give enough time for you guys to be able to fill out your brackets. How we're going to do this is we're going to go over every seed. We're going to talk about every team. And at the end, I'll give you some sleepers to bet on, as well as take a look at my bracket. So hang tight. It's going to be a good one. We have a lot to cover, and hopefully we can get you guys some winners and do as good as we can. So let's first start with the number one seeds, and we're going to start with Alabama, Houston, Purdue, and Kansas. So if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see how the seeds are and how I have the logos labeled out is how they are going to be on the bracket. So Alabama top left, Houston top right, Purdue bottom left, Kansas bottom right. So that'll be for all the seeds. And I'm going to talk to you about the best team. So who I think the best number one seed is, who has the easiest path. So a team that I think will go the furthest, and who has the toughest path, as well as my predictions on where I think they will finish. So again, so we're going to start with Alabama, and I do think that they are the best team, not only the best to number one seed, but the best team in the tournament. They have one of the best players in the country, Brandon Miller, who's going to be probably going in the top three next year in the NBA draft. They only have 5 losses all season, and they come in hot, winning the SEC tournament with an average winning margin of 18 points. The easiest path, we're going to jump to them as well, because they would play Virginia, in my opinion, in the Sweet 16, which I think would be an easy win. Virginia has some veterans on them, but Alabama and that amazing defense that they have, I think would be too much for Virginia. And then eventually the Elite Eight, I think they take on a very tough Arizona team that won the Pac-12. However, I just think that Alabama is too good of a team. So when we take a look at the path, I think they do face the easier competition and they have the chance to go the furthest. Now, the toughest path, I think, is going to be Houston, and they lost their best player, Marcus Sasser, with a groin injury. We don't know when he will be back. That could affect them, but I also think that they have a pretty tough region where they're at. Obviously, Houston losing to Memphis by 10 points in the American Championship tournament is not the way that the number one team wants to go out. By the way, they're the number one bet team to win the championship, but I think they got the toughest path to do so if they want to. So let's talk about where I think the teams will finish. We'll talk a little bit about Purdue and Kansas as well, since we didn't get to them. But going back to Alabama, I think they win it all. They're my pick to win the championship again. A top 5 defense, and their scoring got a lot better in the SEC tournament. They're hot right now. Again, only 5 losses on the season, and defense wins championships. They got the easy path, so I think they have the best shot of winning it all. At the worst, I see them losing in the Elite Eight to Arizona. I think they at least get that far, and no earlier will they be eliminated. But obviously, I like them to win it all. Now, Houston, I'm not as high on. I know a lot of people are, but with the injury to Sasser and the conference that they play in, I just don't like taking them to go further than the Sweet 16. I do have them losing to Miami in the Sweet 16, and I know a lot of people think that's shocking, but Miami had the best record in the ACC. They lose to a hot Duke team in the tournament just by a couple after losing their top center to an injury at the beginning of that game. So I know a lot of people are rolling out Miami, but they've played the tougher competition, and I think they match up well against Houston in the Sweet 16. Now, obviously, I think that they can make it to the championship if they really want to. I think their ceiling is high, but if I had to give them a ceiling, I'd feel comfortable having them go to the Elite Eight, where they would possibly face a very tough Texas team, where I ultimately think that they would lose. I don't see them coming out of the region. Obviously, they can, but I don't see them there. At the worst, I would say that they would, at least make it to the Sweet 16. But definitely, Auburn could give them a run for their money, or Iowa in the second game. Now down to Kansas. I think they have the potential to repeat. Obviously, it's very rare that a team repeats. Only 7 times in history has that happened. So that is not too often. I don't think they win the West either because they really have a tough path as well when you think about UConn being down there and UCLA and Gonzaga. Those are some very tough matchups for Kansas. So ultimately, I would say their ceiling would be to win the thing, but I comfortably have them going to the Final Four. I think that is where they'll finish with the earliest possibly losing in the Sweet 16 to a tough UConn team, which a lot of the experts are having UConn come out of that region, or at least beating Kansas there. So it'll be interesting to see, but I do have a higher ceiling than most experts do. Obviously, they're the reigning champs, so they are going to be picked a lot to come out of that region. And maybe some of the experts know, hey, there's only been 7 teams that have gone on to win back-to-back March Madness tournaments. So I don't think that it'll happen here. Now to Purdue, I think they're the weakest number one. They have struggled lately, almost losing to Penn State in the Big Ten championship and coming close there at the end with a bunch of teams. And they had a rough spell coming into the tournament after being one of the top teams throughout the season. I don't like teams that go cold at the end of the season. But they got Zach Edey, who is one of the best players in the country, obviously due to his height, and he's a mismatch for a lot of teams. But ultimately, I think that they will make it to the Sweet 16, but lose to Duke. I think Duke's a little bit more athletic. They have the bigs that can shut down Edey, and they're hot right now coming into this one. So I like them at the Sweet 16. Obviously, I think the Final Four is their ceiling where they can get to. I don't see them going to the national championship, but I could definitely see them winning the region. But unfortunately, they have to play a tough Duke team, in my opinion, in the Sweet 16. Now, Memphis is a team to watch out for. I think Memphis goes on to face them in the round of 32, and Memphis just took down Houston. I know they were without Sasser, but still, they took down Houston and won the American Conference. Now they're taking on a Purdue teams that's just, kind of that train is kind of derailing a little bit here. Again, winners of the Big Ten. That's a huge achievement, but almost blowing it there to Penn State at the end. So I'm going Sweet 16. I think they go as high as the Final Four, but as low as possibly losing their second game against Memphis. And I did a bracket and I did have Memphis moving on. Something similar to last year where a hot UNC team came in at the 8th seed and ended up going on to the championship and, of course, screwing over my bracket. Now, the number 2 seeds here, we have Arizona, Texas, Marquette, and UCLA. I think these are really talented number 2 seeds, and they can honestly go really far. And we're going to start off with the best team and the team with the easiest path. Both I give to Texas. Texas right now, they had a tough schedule this whole season, but they managed to win the Big 12. They beat Kansas twice. They beat Gonzaga by 21, and they were 9-6 against the top 25. And again, catching fire of late. They also won in the Big 12 tournament by an average of 13 points per game, and they also have one of the top defenses. Now, when I say easiest path, I think Arizona, they have a tough path when you're taking a look at it, but Texas definitely, I think, has possibly one of the toughest matchups for their second game in the round of 32. Runners up with Texas A&M and the SEC, and of course Penn State in the Big Ten. But once they get past there, I think that they have an easy ride to the Final Four. So if they can get past their round of 32 game against a tough Texas A&M or gritty Penn State basketball team, then I think they have the easiest path. Now for toughest path, I think it's Arizona. with Arizona. Obviously, I think going up against a well-rounded Creighton team or a Baylor going into the Sweet 16 is going to be a tough matchup for them. Arizona had a fantastic season. I think they're a very underrated team. I think that they can make it to the championship. I actually had them go into the Final Four in one of my brackets. But I think Elite Eight is where I am comfortable putting them there due to facing Alabama. But a team that can make some noise is Arizona. Now, for eliminations, I think when we take a look at UCLA, we didn't talk much about them, but also a team battling some injuries. They lost to Arizona in the Pac-12 championship. But I do think UCLA has another tough path. Having to go up against Gonzaga in the Sweet 16 is where I think that they will lose. I think they do go the least farthest out of all the number 2 seeds, even though UCLA a very talented team. Obviously, I think that they can make it to the national championship. They are a great team come tournament time, and they're always prepared. However, I just think with, having to go up against Gonzaga eventually, in my opinion, then Kansas is going to be really tough to get past either of those teams in order to win that region. Now, Texas, they're carried by Marcus Carr and Timmy Allen, some great guard play there. At the worst, I see them being eliminated in the Elite Eight to either Miami or Houston. At the best, and where I have them is going to the championship to take on Alabama, because ultimately, if they would take on Kansas in the Final Four, they just beat Kansas and they beat them twice this season. So I really like Texas to move on to the national championship. Can they win it? Obviously, they can. In a bracket, I have them winning it. Is it likely that it could happen? I would say, there's other teams that I would put there, but I do think that they get there. So the ceiling is winning the whole thing. I think the floor would be having them lose in the Elite Eight. Now let's take a look at Arizona. Obviously, their ceiling as well, I think, is winning a championship. I think their floor, I hate to say it, but maybe Missouri. I mean, that's a tough Missouri team that they would play in the second round. But ultimately, I would say the floor would probably be the Sweet 16 versus a Baylor or Creighton team. But I have them at the Elite Eight losing to Alabama. So that's where I'm predicting them to go. And finally, the last number 2 seed, Marquette, a very talented team, winners of the Big East, and they just look really good as well at the end of the season. They played a couple close ones, and I think that they could easily make it to the Final Four or the championship. I'd be comfortable giving them a ceiling of the Final Four, but right now I'm gonna take it a step back and take them to the Elite Eight versus Duke, where I think they ultimately lose. I think the floor for them is not much lower than an Elite Eight or a Sweet 16. I have them facing the 3 seed Kansas State there, who's a tough match, but ultimately I like Marquette just a little bit more. If that would happen in the Sweet 16 to make it to the Elite Eight to take on Duke. So we're 2 seeds in. We're moving on to the 3 seeds. We have Baylor, Xavier, Kansas State, and Gonzaga, teams we've talked about already. And I think the best team is Gonzaga, but they also have the toughest road. Gonzaga has less pressure this year because they're usually a number 1 seed. They're usually one of the best teams in the country coming into the tournament, and they always seem to screw up. Now, as a 3 seed, they don't have as much pressure, which I think is going to really benefit them. They, still have an incredible record of 28-5. And they have, taken on great teams this year. Alabama, Kentucky, Xavier. Gonzaga also ranks first in Division I in offensive efficiency. They're scoring almost 90 points a game, which is really, really beneficial if they could bring that into the tournament. Now, Kansas State, I would say, would have the easiest path just because I think if they can get by either Kentucky or Providence, I think they have an easy first round game versus Montana State. Kentucky has lost some games of recent. Providence could be better, but then they take on a Marquette team who I think is one of the, I know a lot of people might disagree, but one of the weaker number 2 seeds. Probably the weakest in my opinion, behind UCLA. So I think they could get past them, and then ultimately, if Purdue would get dismantled, have a chance to make it to the Final Four. But ultimately, I think that would be the easiest path out of any of these 3 seeds. And again, touch base on Gonzaga. I think they have the toughest path, which would have to be taking on, UCLA, Kansas. So I think that's that. Although they're the best team, they're also going to have the toughest path. Which I thought some other teams that I think are going to do well have tough paths. That's just going to give them, they're going to have to play a lot better against those teams. Now moving on to my predictions. I think we talk about Baylor a little bit here. Baylor is a team that's kind of fallen off the board a little bit in how they've been playing, but they still secure a 3 seed. I think they do make the Sweet 16 to take on Arizona, but ultimately lose. I think that ceiling for them isn't much more, maybe the Elite Eight. So I think Sweet 16 is comfortable. I also think that that's their floor. I think they reached the Sweet 16 with these. The question is then, how will they do afterwards? Now, obviously, Creighton could give them a run for their money, but I think Baylor's just built better for the tournament, and they match up really well against Creighton, which will give them, just a better chance of moving on in the tournament. Xavier, I think Sweet 16 as well. When we talk about their ceiling, they have a tough matchup with Texas that they would face in the Sweet 16. And again, Texas just is a dominant team winning the Big 12. So I don't think they go much further than that. So I think that's where I have them as their ceiling for me. But I also could see Xavier losing to Pitt, and I don't know if it's Pitt or Mississippi State yet. By the time this video is out, I'm sure we'll know who it's going to be. But I have, the potential of Pitt or Mississippi State, the 11 seed, moving on. So I think the floor for Xavier would be the round of 32, but I think the Sweet 16 is a good spot for them if you're betting on them. Now, Kansas State, obviously, I think they could make the Final Four, as I just talked about. But ultimately, I have them losing to Marquette in the Sweet 16. And at the worst, I think they would lose in the round of 32 to Kentucky or Providence. That would be their floor. Finally, Gonzaga, I think they have the chance to win the national championship if they really want to, but I don't see them beating Kansas. And if they do, I think that they're going to have a tough matchup versus Texas. So I think the Elite Eight is a very good spot to have them out, with the ceiling making the championship and the floor getting to the Sweet 16 versus UCLA. They have 2 really easy first round matchups, but then it gets tough after that. The number 4 seeds, we have Virginia, Indiana, Tennessee, and UConn. And I think we could see a good amount of upsets here. I at least have 1, possibly 2, that I really like, and I'm going to bet on. Let's start with the best team, and in my opinion, that is the UConn Huskies. A lot of experts have them going to the Final Four and winning that region. But a team that's ranked 10th in offensive and 14th in defensive efficiencies, teams led by Adama Sanogo and Jordan Hawkins, both averaging 16 points a game, so they pack a punch. UConn also has some really good quality wins: Alabama, Marquette, and Providence. Now, if we talk about the easiest path, I think Virginia has the easiest path out of these teams. The first 2 games, they potentially could play Charleston or San Diego State, which they get by. I think that if they can somehow get past Alabama, I really don't see that happening. Let's just say I think they have the easiest route to the Sweet 16 over any of these other teams, and you'll see down below that them and UConn I have going to the Sweet 16, where the other two number 4 seeds I don't. And the toughest path I think is Indiana. Indiana been struggling recently. In my opinion, they have one of the toughest schedules. I don't see them in one of the upsets I like is Kent State over Indiana. And if they beat them, then a really tough Miami team, and then they would have to take on probably a really tough Houston team if they would get past them. So I think Indiana has the toughest road out of these number 4 seeds. Now, predictions, I think Virginia right now the ceiling is the Sweet 16, and that's where I have them at their ceiling. I know a lot of people are taking Furman to upset them in the first round, but I don't see that happening. Something that's going to be bet a lot, and I think it is going to be a close game, but I just think Virginia will come out and at least win the first one. Indiana, I think the Sweet 16 is their ceiling as well, but ultimately I have them losing to a hot Kent State team, and we're going to talk about them later, and I'll tell you why I like that matchup. Tennessee, I think they won their first game, but they have a ceiling, I think, a little bit higher because of kind of that weak region down there of possibly making it to the Elite Eight or even the Final Four. However, I think they're going to lose in the round of 32 to Duke, who is just one of the hottest teams coming into the tournament. And UConn, the potential there is to make it to the Final Four, make it to the championship. But Kansas, I think that's just a tough matchup for UConn. And ultimately, I think they lose a close one there. So again, the ceiling is very high for UConn, possibly a championship, but the floor is safe at the Sweet 16. So the 5 seeds I really like. I like them more than the 4 seeds this year. I think there's a lot of potential there. And starting with Duke as the best team as a number 5 seed, they finished the season winning their last 9 games by an average of 12 points and winning the ACC tournament championship. They're led by big man Kyle Filipowski, who's nearly averaging a 15-point double-double on the season. I think they have the easiest path as well, and there's a guy who can match up with Zach Edey. So when it comes down to it, I think that Duke will get past Purdue, and again, a vulnerable Purdue team as of late. I also think they would have the easiest path going against Tennessee, and then I think the worst number 1 seed in Purdue, and then possibly Marquette. I think they can make it to the Final Four, which a lot of experts have, and I agree with. The toughest path for me would be St. Mary's. They have a tough matchup versus Virginia Commonwealth. If they can even get past the first game, then they would have to take on a very tough UConn team. So I think the path is just insane for St. Mary's. Again, a very good team out there. Them and Gonzaga lead the way, but ultimately it's just very, very, very tough. And I think they get past the first game, but that's about as far as they'll go. So my predictions, an upset here, San Diego State, I have them losing to Charleston. It's a very popular game that's being picked. Charleston only 3 losses on the year. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. So I think their floor is losing the first game, and that's where I predict them finishing is losing to Charleston in the first game. But if they get past Charleston, I think their ceiling is the Sweet 16. Miami, they have a higher ceiling for me. I think they can easily make the Final Four. I think they could potentially make the championship, but ultimately have them losing to Texas in the Elite Eight. So I'm comfortable there of where they're going to go. But I think that their floor, I think they could also lose in the first game, which Drake has been a very good team. And right now, Miami's only 2-point favorites in that game. So Drake is expected to make a run, potentially upset Miami. And definitely something I might be betting on is Drake over Miami. But if they get past Drake, I think that Miami can make it to the Elite Eight. I think they do beat Houston, and with that guard play of Poplar and Wong, I think it's just going to be too much of a tough matchup for any of these teams coming in their way. Now we'll go to Duke. I think Duke's ceiling is going to the championship and winning the championship. At the best, at the worst, I see them losing to Purdue in the Sweet 16, but I love Duke going to the Final Four. I think they come out of that bottom region there and they move on to take on Alabama. And lastly, St. Mary's, I have losing to UConn in the round of 32. I have them beating VCU, but obviously I don't see them getting past UConn. And if so, they're not going to beat Kansas. So I think the round of 32 is a safe play for St. Mary's as a ceiling. And at the floor, it's going to be a loss to VCU. The number 6 seeds, we have Creighton, Iowa State, Kentucky, and TCU. Iowa State, I think, is the best team coming into this. They have a better overall record against the top 25. They actually have the only winning record out of any of the 6 seeds. Kentucky, I think, has the easiest path. Once they would get past, hopefully, Providence, Kansas State, Marquette, I think they could beat them. And then ultimately taking on Purdue or Duke, potentially they could make it to the Final Four. The toughest path is going to be the Horned Frogs of TCU. They would have to play Gonzaga in their second game. I just don't see them matching that offense of Gonzaga and being able to stop them. Creighton now, on the other hand, I think they could make the Elite Eight, a team that started in the top 10. They had a really rough season, and now as a 6 seed, can they make some noise? Sure, they can. But I have them losing to Baylor, so I think that their ceiling could go as high as possibly the Sweet 16, but I have them comfortably finishing in the round of 32, and I think that's also their floor. Now, when we take a look at Iowa State, I think they could make the Sweet 16 as well with ease. I think that's where their ceiling is, though, but ultimately I have them losing to Xavier in the round of 32, but potentially losing to Pitt or Mississippi State as their floor in the first game. Now to Kentucky, I think they could get upset in the first game. I think that is something to be scared of. I have them being upset by Providence. Obviously, if they can get past Providence, I think they do have a ceiling of making it to the Elite Eight with ease. But other than that, I'm going to say their floor is obviously losing their first game. But their ceiling is really high. I think it's probably the highest ceiling out of any of the 6 seeds. If they can win their first game, they could potentially move on to the Elite Eight. And last, TCU, they have the toughest path. I do think they win their first game, but their ceiling is the round of 32 to a loss of Gonzaga. Now to the number 7 seeds. We have Missouri, Texas A&M, Michigan State, and Northwestern. The best team here is, in my opinion, Texas A&M. They were runner-ups in the SEC to Alabama. And historically, the 7 seeds win over half the times, which I think it'll be 75%. I only see one of these 7 seeds losing to a 10. It's a common pick for a 10 to beat a 7. But I only see really one game, let's just say one game that I'm picking a 10 over a 7. And Texas A&M is a scary team coming into this. They've won 10 of their last 12. And again, they lost to Alabama, but Alabama is right now the best team, in my opinion. The easiest path, I think, would be Missouri if they're able to win their first game against Utah State, which I think they will. I think they could potentially upset Arizona. The toughest schedule, I think, is Northwestern, because if they would happen to win in the first round, which I don't think they will, they would have to take on then UCLA and then potentially Gonzaga and Kansas and so on. So I think that for me, Texas A&M has the highest ceiling of this group, because if they can get past Penn State, if they can get past Texas, then they would have Xavier They would have potentially Houston or Miami. So I actually think the road gets a little bit easier for them. I think their ceiling could be the Final Four. I'm saying that they make it to the round of 32, though, losing to Texas. Missouri, I feel the same way. They make it to the round of 32. I think their ceiling could potentially be the Elite Eight, but that's really stretching it. That's a very, very, low ceiling. I'm not doing that. I feel comfortable winning their first game. And obviously any of these teams could lose their first. That would be their floor. And I think Northwestern has the worst chances of winning. Round of 64, I think they lose to Boise State, with their ceiling being the round of 32. Michigan State could make a little bit more of a run. I think if they win their first game, they could upset Marquette, and maybe even make it to an Elite Eight, but that's, again, really pushing that ceiling. I don't like Michigan State's loss to Ohio State in the Big Ten tournament. It really disappointed me. So I have them winning the first game, but then losing to Marquette. So I'm comfortable putting them there in the round of 32. You're almost halfway there. We're at the 8 seeds now, and the 8 seeds are the first group that I have all to suffer the same fate. Winning the first game, losing the second game. This might be the first year that I'm taking all 8 seeds. I normally pick 9s in there, but I am going to take all 8, or I should say all 4 8 seeds to move on. Which team do I see moving past the round of 32? Who could go the furthest? Well, I think the best team and the easiest path would be Memphis. If I think that they have the potential to upset Purdue in the round of 32, obviously they beat Houston, who's a 1 seed. I think they could beat a worse 1 seed in Purdue. So Memphis has the potential to honestly go to the Sweet 16, to the Elite Eight, hell, even to win that region down below and go to the Final Four. But comfortably, I say that they do give Purdue a run for their money, but they do lose. And again, Memphis coming in hot, 14 of their last 17, and 2 of those losses both came to Houston. The toughest path, Maryland. Think if Maryland wins, if they can get past West Virginia, they'd have to take on the number 1 team in Alabama. Iowa, again, I think they win their first game, and that's it. Same with Arkansas. And as we go through these last seeds remaining, there won't be as much conversation just because I don't see those teams, going far. But obviously, there's a couple seeds here that I'll be talking about when we get to about 12, 13 that I think could make some noise. Now, we don't have to talk too much about the 9 seeds because I already told you my opinion. I think that the 9 seeds are all going to lose in the first round. The best team, though, I think is Florida Atlantic. Obviously, only losing 3 games this whole season. Auburn, I think, could win 2 games. I think their ceiling is potentially going to the round of, or I should say the Sweet 16, beating Houston and so on. And I think West Virginia has the toughest path, again, as Maryland would have to play Alabama in the next round. The 10 seeds, Utah State, Penn State, USC, and Boise State. The 10 seeds all have potential to win a game, but ultimately, I think only Boise State will move on to the round of 32. I think Penn State's the best team here. Obviously, a team that caught fire in the Big Ten tournament, almost winning the Big Ten. And they have a really good group of guys that can shoot the 3 ball fantastic. They rank top 30 in offense, and only losing to Purdue by 2. But unfortunately, they drew the toughest battle against Texas A&M, which really hurts them and gives them the toughest path. A win against Texas A&M would then mean to have to play Texas, which I just don't see them winning there. Now, the easiest path, I think, would be USC, get past Michigan State. I think they could get past Marquette and then potentially Kansas State or Kentucky, or even Providence. So I think that is the toughest path. Now, when we're talking about predictions, I think that all of them lose besides Boise State, and Boise State's ceiling is just winning one game and then losing to UCLA. I think the highest ceiling here could potentially be USC if they were to win their first game, but I don't see that happening. Now, the 11 seeds, we have NC State. As I'm making this video, I don't know yet if Pitt or Mississippi State will be in, but my prediction is Pitt, Providence, and Arizona State. I think the best team is NC State coming into this. I do think NC State could beat Creighton. And they're one of the best teams out of this group, finishing 2-2 against the top 25, and they have a very good offense. Providence, in my opinion, would have the easiest path. If they can get past Kentucky, then they would have Kansas State, Marquette, and again, Providence could make a run down there in that bottom region. The toughest, I would say, would be Arizona State. Again, if they even beat Nevada, then they would have to take on TCU and then Gonzaga and so on. I ultimately think that the two best bets to move on the furthest and the highest ceiling would be NC State and Providence, but I do have them losing, or I should say, I have Providence winning the round of 32. I think they're the most likely to do so. Next, I would say NC State. Then I would go Pitt, then Arizona State if I had to pick an order on who I think could win that first round game. But there's not much ceiling there. Like I said, Providence probably has the highest ceiling, but I'm going round of 32 for them for where I'm comfortable, where I think they're going to finish in the round of 64 for the rest of the seeds. Now, the 12 seeds could get very interesting. If all 12 seeds win in the first game, I would not be shocked at all. These 12 teams are probably some of the strongest 12 seeds that I have seen in a March Madness bracket in a long time. And starting with the best team, in my opinion, and with the easiest path would be Charleston. They were in the top 25 at one point this year. They only have 3 losses, and they rank in the top 20 in both offense and defensive efficiency. I think they also would have the easiest path to the Sweet 16. Obviously, then I think they would take on Virginia, who Charleston, they're young, got a great offense, great defense. I think they could pass them and potentially even make it to the Sweet 16. Oral Roberts, in my opinion, would have the toughest path going up. Obviously, if you beat Duke, then you got to play Tennessee, then you got to play a Purdue team that's just big, and I don't think they would have a matchup for Zach Edey, so I think they have the toughest matchup. But what helps Oral Roberts, they have the 3rd best offense in the country, and we already know they can upset. We've seen it happen just a few years ago. Drake is another team I got to talk about. Drake has won 13 of their last 14, and they are also 1-0 against the top 25. And then VCU, they won the Atlantic 10 and have won 17 of their last 19. Again, a team that we know about that made a run years ago, pretty deep, I believe, to the Final Four, if I'm not mistaken, or at least the Elite 8. So again, all of these teams could upset, but where do I have them? So let's talk about Charleston first. I am betting them to win against San Diego State in the first round. I do have them then losing to Virginia, but I think their ceiling is the highest out of any of these other squads, maybe tied with Drake. I think their ceiling is the Sweet 16. Obviously, they could lose their first game, but I am picking them to win their first game and lose in the second game for them. Oral Roberts, I could see them potentially making a Sweet 16 as well. If they beat Duke, I could see them easily being Tennessee. And I think that that's kind of where their journey would end. I would say the lowest floor would be Virginia Commonwealth. I really don't see them moving far along. If they would happen to upset St. Mary's, then they would have to play UConn, which I just don't see them beating UConn. Drake can make the Sweet 16 as well. I think if they beat Miami, then they could beat Indiana or Kent State, and I think they could give a run for their money to Houston. So these 12 teams, these 12 seeds are probably the strongest I've seen in a March Madness bracket probably ever. Now, the 13 seeds, I like two of these teams to upset, and I would really like one. It's my number one upset, really, is Kent State over Indiana. And I'm taking that in every bracket. Kent State almost beat Houston. They only lost them by 5. And almost beat Gonzaga. Only lost them by 7. They're also a well-rounded team led by guard Sincere Carey, who's averaging almost 18 points per game. The Flash is coming hot too, winning 10 of their last 11 and winning the MAC. They beat Toledo, and Toledo tonight almost beat Michigan in the NIT. If they beat Indiana, then I can see them easily beating Miami, or potentially we could have a 12 versus 13 there if Drake would upset. And actually, in one of my brackets, I have that Kent State Drake. We got to have a little mix up, and there's always a upsets in the tournaments, and I think this could be it up there. And could they beat Houston with the injuries? Sure, we've seen them almost beat them already. They only lost by 5. Now it's neutral turf, so say neutral court. So I think they would have the easiest path. The toughest path would be Iona to me. I think they're the worst team out of the 13 seeds. I don't have them, moving on and beating or moving on and winning to play UConn and Kansas. They're not going to go much further than that. Now, again, I said with Virginia, Furman, a team who could potentially upset Virginia, and a team that a lot of people will be betting on to do so. But they really have a bad defense. So I think their ceiling would be the round of 32 if they would happen to win. I think they lose to San Diego State or Charleston at that point. Kent State, I think their ceiling is as high as the Elite Eight. I know it sounds insane, but it's true. I think that could be their ceiling, and I know that's pushing it. I'm comfortable taking them to the round of 32 and then losing to Miami. But if they get past Miami, they get past Indiana, they could easily get past Houston, as we've already seen them almost do this season. Louisiana, I don't see them beating Tennessee. And if they do so, I don't see them beating Duke. So they're ceiling round of 32. I think they lose the first one. Same with Iona. Now, the 14 seeds, we have UC Santa Barbara, Kennesaw State, Montana State, and Grand Canyon University. Now, we all know that the 14 seeds have struggled in all the tournaments, with only one 14 seed winning in the last 5 tournaments. Now, the pick that I think a lot of people are going to take is going to be UC Santa Barbara over Baylor. But I think Kennesaw State is the better team out of any of this group. They played Indiana tough in Indiana and then almost beat Virginia Commonwealth. Now, UC Santa Barbara has the easiest path, I think, because if they were to win, then they could possibly beat Creighton in the second round. And I think Grand Canyon has the toughest because they'd have to play Gonzaga right off the bat, and I don't see them beating Gonzaga at all. I don't see any 14 seeds upsetting. If you told me I had to pick one, I probably would say Kennesaw State over Xavier. But ultimately, I think all these teams lose in the round of 64 and don't go any further. Now, the 15 seeds have upset the number 2 seeds. We saw last year St. Peter's defeating Kentucky, but will someone do it this year? And the question is, if a 15 seed does do it, who would it be? I don't see it happening this year. I think Colgate is probably the best 15 seed we have here. They're the best 3-point shooting team in the country. Vermont, I think, could have the easiest path, and I think a lot of people might take Vermont over Marquette, or at least have them cover the spread. If they would beat Marquette, then they could take on a beatable Michigan State team and then possibly Kansas State. Colgate, however, has the toughest because then they would have to take on a really hot Texas A&M or Penn State team and so on. In the end, I don't see any of these teams winning, but if I had to pick one, I would go with Colgate. And of course, we still have Princeton there. I don't see Princeton beating Arizona and UNC Asheville. I don't have them beating UCLA. And finally, we get to the 16 seeds. So if you made it this far with me, make sure to like and share this video and let's try to win some games and win some bets in this 2023 March Madness tournament. The 16 seeds aren't well represented. I did put Texas A&M Corpus Christi. I did watch that game before making this podcast. We have Northern Kentucky, and we have Texas Southern and Howard. I do think Texas Southern does defeat Farley Dickinson. So that's why I have them in here. But again, it is not official as of making this podcast. And, the 16 seeds obviously aren't well represented. They've only ever won one game in March Madness history when UMBC upset Virginia. But out of all these teams, who could probably make the biggest upset? And I also think it's the best team with the easiest path would be Northern Kentucky. They have a very good defense. They also beat Cincinnati this year, and they played Florida Atlantic closer than expected. If they win, I think that they could move on to the Sweet 16, but I don't think any 16 seeds are going to win this year. Again, if I have to pick one, it would be Northern Kentucky over Houston. So now let's take a look at my bets. And these are going to be the biggest round of 64 upsets to bet that I am going to have tickets for 100%. And first of all, Kent State over Indiana. I already talked about them already, almost beating Houston and Gonzaga. They score more points per game than Indiana, and they also have a better defense. Indiana also went 4-4 in their last 8 games with 2 losses coming by 15 points plus to average teams. This is writing on the wall of an upset, and I'm surprised that not many people or experts are taking this. They're in love with Indiana. I don't see why. Kent State is my number 1 upset this year in the 2023 March Madness tournament. Next, I would say Charleston over San Diego State. That is the number 12 seed, Charleston. Charleston only had 3 losses all year. And again, we're ranked in the top 25 and are ranked top 20 in offensive and defensive efficiency. Although San Diego State has a very good defense, but just a little bit better than Charleston. Charleston averages over 8 more points per game than them. San Diego State also was 0-2 against the top 25, Charleston 0-1. So I really like Charleston here to win, and I think that they could easily make the Sweet 16 if they beat San Diego State. The next one I would take is Providence over Kentucky. That's 11 seed Providence. Both teams are pretty even. Providence getting the nod on offense, Kentucky on defense. Providence does have one more top 25 win than Kentucky. Providence has beaten number 2 seed Marquette, number 4 seed UConn, and number 6 seed Creighton, whereas Kentucky lost to UCLA, Gonzaga, Alabama, and Kansas by double digits. Besides the Kansas game was a 9-point game. I'm going to throw in Boise State over Northwestern there at number 4. This is really a toss-up game, but Boise State ranks better offensively. So I think they could win. Northwestern has also dropped 4 of their last 5 games to non-ranked teams. And finally, Drake over Miami. I hate saying it because I love Miami, but I think that they could beat them. Drake winning 13 of their last 14 and are 1-0 versus the top 25. They are the 16th best defensive team in the tournament, and Miami has been struggling to keep leads. So if Miami can't get out to a big lead and it's a close game, I think it's in favor of Drake. So now let's go to my bracket. Here's who I'm picking. And again, I've kind of already told you, but let's just look at it visually so you guys can see. I like Alabama to move on to face Maryland. Maryland has more quality wins and a better defense. So I have Maryland beating West Virginia. My second favorite upset to pick, I already told you, Charleston. I have them winning their first round matchup versus San Diego State, and then Virginia over Furman. I have Creighton. I think Creighton NC State will be a really close game, but I do slightly favor Creighton there due to the more quality wins and better defense. I have Baylor over UC Santa Barbara, Missouri over Utah State, since Utah State has failed to beat a top 25 team compared to Missouri, who's beaten a top 25 team 6 out of the 10 times played. And of course, Arizona over Princeton. I think Alabama ultimately makes it to the Final Four, and it's pretty much chalk the rest of the way. We have the 1 versus the 4, the 2 versus the 3 in the Sweet 16, and then the 1 beating the 2. Now it shakes up a little bit when we go over to the Midwest. I will take Houston over Northern Kentucky, Iowa over Auburn. I am taking Miami over Drake. I just like that offense with Wong and Poplar leading the way. And if they can get their center back healthy, I think that'll really help them as well. I do like Kent State over Indiana, as you see here. Iowa State over Pitt or Mississippi State. Iowa State is a top 20 defense, and they've had a tougher strength of schedule. And I have Xavier over Kennesaw State, Texas A&M over Penn State, just because they've had a tougher schedule than Penn State. Finally, Texas over Colgate. I then like Miami to eventually upset Houston in the Sweet 16 to make it to the Elite Eight to take on Texas. And I like Texas winning the Midwest. Now going to the bottom part of the bracket to the East, I like Purdue to win against Texas Southern, or if they play Farley Dickinson, same there. I have chalk for all the first round games there. I know I said I'm picking Providence to upset, but in the bracket, I'm not doing it. I will bet it though. So I have chalk, Purdue, Memphis, Duke over Oral Roberts, Tennessee over Louisiana, Kentucky over Providence, Kansas State over Montana State, Michigan State over USC, and Marquette over Vermont. I then have Duke upsetting Tennessee, and then I have Duke upsetting Purdue, and it ultimately leading to Duke versus Marquette, with Duke going to the Final Four. And now when we go to the West region, I'll take all chalk in the first round in the West besides Boise State. So I have Kansas. I know it says Illinois there for an upset. I think that's an error that I got to fix. I do think, well, maybe I do have Illinois there. Anyways, I think that could be a 9 that wins would be Illinois. St. Mary's, UConn, TCU, Gonzaga, Boise State, UCLA. At that point, I have chalk pretty much the rest of the way, besides Gonzaga over UCLA. And ultimately, I have Kansas beating Gonzaga, moving on to the Final Four to take on Texas. Now, first, Alabama, Duke. I have Alabama winning over Duke. And then Texas, Kansas. I have Texas beating Kansas once again. And then ultimately, Alabama versus Texas, the 1 versus the 2 in Houston, Texas. Give me the Crimson Tide to win the national championship in a tough battle between the Texas Longhorns. I have a final score of 78-73. That's what I got for you here tonight, guys. Thanks for listening. Make sure to share with your friends. I am over on TikTok, Sports Lock Podcast. I will be posting a lot of videos come March Madness time during the games. I'll be doing little videos over there. So make sure if you're not following me over there, do so. We're up over 7,000 followers there and over 11,000 likes. I also have Instagram, Sports Lock Podcast. Of course, if you're not following me here on YouTube, I plan on making more videos coming up with the podcast, especially when we come NFL draft time and when we get into the Triple Crown season with the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness Stakes, and the Belmont Stakes. I'll be making videos about that. And of course, what I love to talk about, fantasy football. We'll start getting into that after the NFL draft. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a video. And best of luck to you guys this March Madness season. Make sure to watch all the games, enjoy. Hopefully you hit some bets as well as we do. I'll be posting my bets over on my TikTok and Instagram of Sports Lock Podcast. So if you don't know who to bet, go check out those pages. If you follow them, you'll get notified when I post things. All right, that's it for me. Wish you all the best of luck this week. And as always, let's get it.